So I find that really fascinating about the green jobs and a lack of kind of workers, so to speak. Because when I'm thinking about it, and we're similar age. You're 26, I'm 25, and if I were to think back to when I was 17 or 18, I'm like, if I could go back to uni, or even if I go now to university, I'm like, what would I study? And I think that's something a lot of young people ask themselves, because I think with our generation, we understand that we can have multiple careers, multiple interests, all these things. And I'm thinking, okay, if I go to study in climate change in some facet, it's like some part of me is worried that by the time I finish my 3, 4, 5 year degree, the world is going to be infinitely different and my qualification is just worthless. So, with your perspective here, you clearly have thought about certain industries or skills that are going to be super necessary for us to establish this transition. What jobs or fields do you think that people should focus on if they're looking to kind of get into this field, or they're passionate about helping this transition?
Well, again, I will here put a division between jobs that would require higher education and those who would not. But that doesn't mean that if your job would not require higher education, that it would be any less valuable
Mm-hmm.
or less paid. Quite to the contrary, in fact, and would not require less education on the job. So, with that in mind, we would proceed. So in the first category, we are talking about, of course, of all sorts of technicians in installation and maintenance across a wider spectrum of renewable energy sources. We are also talking about those who would be working for the contractors that would help households insulate their homes, help them install heat pumps, potentially also transition those households to power to X, as it's called, to achieve greater integration between heating and electricity. So that is the category of the jobs that require specialized technical education. When it comes to the jobs that require higher education, I think research and development in clean energy, this is something that should interest many of us because R&D is where many battles for climate action are won or lost, especially when it comes to determining the fate of scalability of
Mm.
certain important technologies. We are talking about the jobs in hard to abate industries, especially for specialists who would be battling such important topics as decarbonization of processes like cement production, uh, carbon-free steel. I mean, I have an example in my family. My father-in-law is working on a plant in the north of Sweden that managed to start producing a special type of iron that is producing 90% fewer carbon emissions than before, thanks to the technology they have, and is using as a feeder for the carbon neutral steel that would be produced starting from 2026 and be supplied to Volvo for their cars. So we are talking about hard to abate sectors where there would be a lot of positions for tech people, for chemists, for those who would be also into industrial carbon capture and storage. Of course, we are also talking about people from not only industries, though among industries, I would also probably want to emphasize shipping, uh, specialists in decarbonization of maritime shipping. This is one of the stickiest, if we take aviation aside for a second, one of the stickiest sectors when it comes to reduction of carbon emissions. I mean, we will see how the efforts of Maersk, for example, would go to present their first ever carbon neutral ship in the second half of this decade. But this is also an industry to keep a close eye on. And the service sector, we should not pass by our attention. For especially, I'm talking about all the colleagues who would be going in all sorts of sectors of banking, because apart from the moral aspect of the industry, unfortunately, still being a very serious contributor to the climate crisis through financing of fossil fuels, we also see that industries such as banking, consulting, and others, they are only now like rolling out the proper capacities and practices when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to green investment, green bonds, and so on. And in order for this to flourish, you of course need skilled operators, so to speak, of these nascent and sometimes already functioning green financial systems. Because if we have service industries that cannot funnel green investments into the industries themselves will not have incentives to become green, even if, for example, there is a forceful political movement in power that through legislation would push them towards that. But ultimately, it also comes down to the provision of financial resources, and those allocations, they speak volumes about the moods among the key economic players more than any legislation. However, we would want more that it would rather be a matter of democratic control. I would, for example,